The November and December PF topic is out. It is resolved. The United States should substantially reduce its military support of Taiwan. Um, Pretty interesting topic for sure. I'm currently living in Taiwan for the next year. So I have maybe some extra opinions about it than I normally would have. But I wanted to start a series of videos in this channel to do something a little bit different from what I think other channels have done. So I have seen a lot of people like release topic analyses. I have a topic analysis that I just wrote as well. That's pretty long. I'll attach it in the description of this video so you can read it if you want. And I'll probably record maybe a more formal topic analysis video on this topic later. But I want to do something a little bit different than that. Like, I think the more helpful thing would be to do kind of like a let's play, like prep the topic with me series or something. So what I want to do is hopefully do some kind of like weekly or daily video on this topic that's just like prepping it. And so hopefully I will be able to show you a blend of like the skills that I'm using and that I hope to teach you, as well as something that is specific to the topic with every video. So for this one, for example, what I've done is I've done a lot of research on like the background of the topic, like the news that's happening around China and Taiwan at the moment. And in future videos, I will actually sit down and like cut an entire case live or do prep outs of like cases that appear on the wiki once tournaments start in November, which hopefully will be more helpful. And I don't know, hopefully that's a thing that like people will benefit from. So for today, one of the issues that I've seen in PF, along with a lot of other research-based debate events, is that there's not a lot of like incentives to prepare cards or do a lot of research on the background stuff, because it seems like you never really are able to use it, or if you are able to use it, it's only because you put in the extra time and effort of cutting it into a card. Because you need to have a card for everything that you say, apparently. I think one, this is like kind of a bad norm. Maybe that's a controversial take. I know it's crazy to say like you shouldn't have to cite evidence for everything, but I genuinely think that this is like creating a chilling effect in PF on people doing actual research into the topic and like watching videos and stuff that are something that maybe you can't cite as easily in a debate round, but are actually more helpful for real education. But I think that the thing that I've done here that hopefully can combat this a little bit, is I've gone through and I've made a list of all of the headlines that I think are relevant to the topic. So literally what I've done is like I've gone and I've typed in China to Google. Then I go to the news tab here and I just like have copied all of the headlines that I think are relevant. There are some new ones that have popped up since I've done this. So like China is posting slow economic growth. China moves to support markets after data shows the economy is slowing. So it seems like the economy is not doing so hot right now. And I've just gone through pages and pages of these different headlines, which I think is one of the most interesting ways to prep because you actually get a sense of like, first of all, the most up-to-date information on the topic. Like no one is going to post date you probably. But second, you also actually get a sense of all of the different things that are happening in the world at the moment, which I think is really educational and helpful for the topic. So I have this list of a bunch of headlines, and the ones that are bolded and underlined, I've actually cut as cards that are at the bottom. So, for example, this first headline, China's show of force in massive military exercises alarms Taiwan. That is just this card right here. And I've tried to cut the entire article for all of these. It's clearly like way more than you would actually read if you're like quoting the cut card in a speech. But it at least I think should give people a starting point. And it will allow you to be a little bit more confident if you like have a fact that you've heard. For example, a fact that you saw in this video, but you don't have a card for it. You can just pull up this document, which I will also attach to the description of this video, and be like, here's your card if they ask for it in Crossfire, for example. So I'm trying to make this like a public resource that people can use to be able to cite things that they know without as much fear of the other side, like calling them out for not having a cut card. So I've done this with, I think, a lot of just sort of, I think the most relevant headlines from each of the sections. And it's a lot of really interesting information that I've learned about what's happening. So the first, I guess, like I'll summarize some of the main points of what this batch of headlines has been in the past like week or two. The first big thing that happened is President Lai. He's called like William Lai sometimes as his English name. He got elected back in May in 2024 to replace the previous president, Tsai Ing-wen, and he is a little bit interesting. He's a little bit more controversial than the previous president for China, at least. Both of them are from the same party, the Democratic People's Party, the DPP, in Taiwan, which is opposed by the other major party, the KMT. The KMT has like slightly more conservative policies toward China, so they favor more approaches that are like, I guess, slightly more diplomatic and engage China more conservatively, whereas the DPP is much more progressive. So the DPP and specifically Lai have done a lot of things that made China a little bit more angry recently. So as soon as he got elected in May, China launched a massive military exercise around all of Taiwan. And then they just did another one like this past week after Taiwan's National Day. Lai gave a speech in that National Day that was a little bit provocative. It said some interesting things about how like neither the ROC, which is the name for Taiwan's government, nor the PRC, which is the name for China's government, are like subordinate to one another, and that Taiwan will, fight for its sovereignty and stuff. This is not like a declaration of independence, which would certainly cross a red line for China. But it still were some, it represented some remarks and some sentiments that China wanted to fight back against. And so immediately after that, China started another massive military exercise around Taiwan that just ended. And so there's a lot of headlines that are around that like military drill that seemingly was in reaction to these comments that were made that China says were like separatist comments by the president of Taiwan. So we've got a lot of cards about that. We've also got a lot of cards about the state of China's economy, which is in not a great situation recently. It hasn't been in a great situation for actually like a while now. But increasingly that is becoming evident. There's a combination of a lot of different factors that are hurting Chinese economy. So the first one, the most apparent one recently is like the property sector, like the real estate sector, is not doing very well at all. There's also some issues with deflation where China is just, there's not a lot of consumer sentiment. So a lot of people are just not really buying things in China for a number of different reasons. For one, they don't really get paid very much, so they don't have that much money to buy things with. And they're hesitant to invest in a lot of other things, given that a lot of the stocks are seeming pretty volatile right now. Speaking of the stock market, what happened recently is that China hadn't done a lot of like government stimulus for a very long time. And so people were pretty surprised when the government announced that it would have a stimulus package. And in fact, everyone kind of all the stock market investors, they were like going crazy. They started like foaming at the mouth and being like, wow, China's economy is about to like blow up and go really, really high. Especially in the property sector that the stimulus was announced for. And so a lot of people started investing way, way more in China. But then there was like a meeting with the housing ministry and or like there was a meeting with like the economic planners specifically. And there were some like predictions apparently that in this meeting they would like declare a massive new extra stimulus for the property sector. But they kind of just didn't say very much at all. And so then investors were like, oh, okay, I guess there's not going to be more government support for the property sector, at least not as much as they thought there would be. And so then stocks kind of plummeted back down. The massive rise has chilled out a lot, and China's kind of back to the original position that it was in, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Like, arguably, if the stock market had continued to heat up more and more and more, this could have created a massive bubble that eventually would have popped and created a much worse situation for China. But that did not happen. So that was avoided. But at the same time, like the stimulus package would have probably been good. There's a lot of headlines that I was reading that say like really like it's very important for China to have more stimulus than it currently has. Like I think there's even some in here. Um, yeah, like China needs stimulus with beautiful deleveraging. There was a South China Morning Post article I was reading today that said it needs like a 10 trillion um, uh, NTD or not NTD, renminbi stimulus package if it wants to have like a real rebound. But there are a lot of debates about this, about whether or not that would actually be good for the economy. There's also a bunch of other factors that are hurting China's economy, like like on a grander scale over a larger time. So, for example, like demographics, they're struggling with a pretty low birth rate and an aging population, which is the opposite of how they used to be. Um, and that's not very great. So they're in this like middle income trap now as well. And on top of all of that, the reporting of like actual economic statistics in China is kind of messed up because there are some perverse incentives for the local governments to kind of over-report statistics about the economy. And even the like CCP itself has had a trend of kind of like only telling the world about the good news and not the bad news. And a lot of people don't really want to tell Xi Jinping that the economy is not doing well. In fact, there's even been some censorship of people in China who are complaining about the economy. And so it seems like, you know, all of this political, like personal politics from Xi Jinping might also be getting in the way of like actual economic reform because if you don't acknowledge the problem, then it's hard to actually start like fighting for solutions to the problem. And for that reason, like basically no one who is a serious expert actually takes the self-reported statistics from China to be real. So even though the growth that is reported by China is still quite strong, people don't think that it's really actually accurate. And it's even the numbers that are reported by China have been falling. So it seems like maybe a bit of a dire situation. But they're still doing like in the grand scheme of things, like they're still doing pretty good. Just not compared to how they used to be and not compared to how they want to be. There's a lot of other different things going on with Taiwan. It's got its own internal politics as well. They just had a typhoon recently. Um, so there are a lot of different headlines about the military drills. Also, there's this one that I cut that was about like South Africa relocating the representative office for Taiwan that is in Pretoria, which is their capital. So this is apparently after like China has been pressuring them. They did the same thing to Nigeria a few years ago. It just shows how China can leverage its economic and diplomatic power to get other countries to sort of isolate Taiwan diplomatically. The former president Tsai is also going on a little tour across Europe, which is interesting. Might also be a little bit provocative to China. We'll see how that plays out. I looked up some like China-Taiwan war headlines to see if there's any good uniqueness evidence. No one really thinks that it's coming anywhere anytime soon. The prevailing thought on this is probably from like Hal Brands, who is an author of the book The Danger Zone. It's like the coming crisis with China or something. And he's a very influential thinker in like foreign policy spaces with regard to China. He wrote a lot of articles in the Atlantic as well. The other one is like David Sachs is a big thinker, but Hal Brands has this theory that is pretty popular that the prime time for China's invasion of Taiwan is going to be in like the mid 2020s, like 2026 or 2027 probably. But not really like 2025 necessarily. So no one really thinks that China is going to invade very soon. The US government certainly doesn't think so. I actually like as part of the Fulbright grant that I'm on to be in Taiwan, it's actually like a US Department of State program to provide me this grant. And so one of the things that we did is we actually sat down and talked with the American Institute in Taiwan, which is like the de facto like embassy that is here. And one of the questions that I asked them was like, what's going to happen to us if there's like an actual invasion of China? Not that I think that this is likely. And their answer was basically like, well, there's like disaster preparedness measures, but like, yeah, there's not going to be like between you and me, like it's not going to happen. And I tend to trust that. Like, it seems like those people are in positions where they would have much more intel on this than even like these headlines have. And so it seems like people would be freaking out more if there actually was an indication that China would attack soon. Nonetheless, there are still people who fear that China will attack, not necessarily soon, but like in the next few years or so. Probably before 2030 is the timeline that people think, um, if it will attack at all. But there are a lot of different headlines about how it's like gearing up with these new drills, how these new drills show it has greater and greater capabilities. It's like modernizing its military and changing its tactics around how it might like simulate an attack on Taiwan as well, with things like a blockade of resources and preventing other like the US from sending military assistance, for example. And again, it redoubled its commitments to like not renounce the use of force. But these have been like speaking lines from China since like many years back. So it's nothing really surprising, nothing really new. The South China Morning Post uh, sounds like I don't know it. They have China in the name, so it sounds like they could be like biased. I actually have found that they're a pretty neutral source that is quite credible. A lot of people cite them, and so these are just a lot of headlines from them specifically in the past few days that I think were relevant. So I've cut a few of these about the property sector. The Philippines has asked the U.S. to donate a missile cruiser to them, which opens up some more questions about the South China Sea. So what's happening in the South China Sea? A small historical breakdown is like lots of different countries in the South China Sea, which is south of China, have lots of overlapping territorial claims. The main ones you need to know about are the Philippines, Malaysia, and obviously China. China has this idea of this like historical nine-dash line, which is a massive claim of a lot of maritime resources across the South China Sea that are important because they have like fish, they have energy resources, and also just like for sovereignty concerns as well. And the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, they had a tribunal a few years ago that ruled against China, as everyone kind of knew that it would, because the claims were not really legitimate under international law. But obviously, China ignored that ruling, and they've continued to try to fight for those claims in a number of different like disputed atolls and islands and like maritime resources in the South China Sea. And this has escalated, especially recently. All the headlines always say it's escalating. Like I debated a topic about the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea back when I was like a junior in high school, which was a long time ago. And the headlines back then said like the tensions are coming to a boil in the South China Sea, and nothing really happened. But it seems like this time maybe it's actually true that tensions are increasing more than they have in the past. There have been some bouts of violence recently between, especially China and the Philippines. They like the boats kind of like get into fights. Specifically, China has done a lot of like antagonistic things where they'll fire like water in these water cannons with really rapid velocity at like the Philippines fishing boats because they're not in the right territory. They're encroaching upon China's territory. And so there's been some violence recently, and the Philippines is kind of freaking out, which is maybe explains why they would ask the US for like a missile cruiser. Unclear if the US will say yes, by the way. Meanwhile, we also have ASEAN, which is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. It's like a bunch of different countries that includes the Philippines and Malaysia, and also other countries like Indonesia that also have some of the claims in the South China Sea. Notably, I don't think it includes China. It kind of negotiates with China, but it does not include China. But it's been trying since like 2002 to create a code of conduct on the South China Sea to create diplomatic mechanisms for exchange and stuff. And it hasn't really made any progress. Like it keeps saying that it has, but I don't really think it's true. In 2017, it finalized like a code of conduct, but it needs to do more work to like actually, I don't know what the next step is. Like the final, like the polishing, I don't really know what's happening. But it seems like it keeps kind of stalling. Supposedly there's optimism right now because they just had a meeting in Laos, where they negotiated with a bunch of different diplomats from lots of countries in ASEAN and outside of ASEAN. Like some US diplomats and Chinese diplomats were also there, and also some from like Japan, which is not in ASEAN. Um, and supposedly there was some cause for optimism on the South China Sea, but I'm not so sure because it seems like all the facts on the ground are pointing to more and more escalation. Beijing is also increasing surveillance infrastructure in different like islands in the South China Sea. South Korea is trying to get involved, but a little bit. And the US, as always, is doing freedom of navigation operations where it like sails its boats through the territory that supposedly belongs to China, as a little like screw you. and has also helped like the other militaries in the region to some extent and reaffirmed its commitments, which it always does. There's also some territorial disputes between China and Japan in the East China Sea, specifically in the Senkaku Islands, or they're the same as these ones, the Diaoyu Islands. That's just what China calls them, because again, they're disputed. And so there's been a little bit of tensions there, not as much as in the South China Sea, though. And then I went to the actual headlines that matter the most to this topic. So, looking at some background about US arms sales to Taiwan, which is a massive part of its military support. Recently, the US has actually done a lot of different kinds of arms sales. So, it's kind of complicated to like sift through all of them because they all have different amounts of money involved. They've all happened at different times. And have different timelines as well. Like some of them are really delayed, some of them are not. There's one that was like 19 to 20 billion dollars that was approved like a long time ago, like many years ago. I think during the Trump administration, that includes a bunch of like F-16s and stuff like that. That still hasn't arrived in Taiwan because of a bunch of delays, but is scheduled, I think, to arrive by the end of the year. And so there's some like I think confusion and there's some like complaint that is coming from both the US and Taiwan about some of these arms sales being like delayed and very costly, and some also being obsolete. Like there were some complaints that some of the gear was just like didn't work or some of it was moldy and stuff. But in general, it seems like we're building more and more arms sales to Taiwan. Like the trend is definitely increasing. There are new government functions that were passed by Congress that allow the president to like fast track some weapons to Taiwan through different channels that are faster than the ones that we used earlier. These were introduced in 2022, and they allow Biden to approve like $1 billion in weapons transfers directly from our stockpiles to Taiwan every year, I think. But there is a little bit of a lack of actual funding that goes into that. So it's not really $1 billion per year. It's more like a few hundred million. But still quite sizable. Like we're giving them a lot of different asymmetric capabilities. And if you want to know any more details about like what is actually involved in these arms sales, I mean, like research it yourself, but some of it's also in these cards that I've cut as well. Um, Lots of like drones and like Stinger missiles and like I think we gave them some Patriot missile defense systems as well, um, things like that. And then the final batch of headlines is about U.S. military support as like a more broad thing. So there are a few interesting headlines here, like different statistics on what Taiwanese people think, what American people think. Taiwan, by the way, is not all that bothered. Like most of the citizens in Taiwan didn't really care about the military drills that China just did, even though they were some of the biggest in history. Like from a personal anecdote, like I am living in Taiwan right now, and I wouldn't have known that they were happening if I wasn't prepping this topic because people are not really talking about them that much. But also this evidence says that people don't really care because it's kind of a regular thing at this point. Um, and of course, we have a lot of different times that Joe Biden has said that the U.S. would defend Taiwan, but his administration has always kind of rolled back those comments to maintain some strategic ambiguity. The idea is like we don't want to say that we would actually defend Taiwan or do anything that might provoke China. The fear is like if we commit too much to Taiwan, then Taiwan will feel comfortable declaring independence. And then that will cause a war, which we're not actually prepared to win or fight, or who knows if we would actually want to get involved at all. So yeah, here are all of the cards. It's like 28 pages of cards, a little bit too much in my opinion. But if you want to read through these, like it's nice to have a batch of cards that just kind of talk about background information so you're more educated on the topic. You don't make arguments that just don't make any sense. This is maybe a place where you can start if you haven't started prepping yet. It's just like read through these and it might inspire you to know what to look for when you're doing your own research. Um, yeah. So I think I'll end it there. I'm going to attach both the topic analysis and this document with headlines in this video description. And then next time I'll probably give a formal topic analysis. And I want to start actually like prepping like properly on this topic. So I'll probably write a case on both the pro and the con side. And I want to record a video that's just like me sitting down from start to finish. starting with like a blank document and finishing with a full case with cards. Hopefully taking like much less than an hour to do this. But I'll record the whole thing and I'll post it on the YouTube channel to let you get a sense of like my thought process. And I'll include all of my strategic commentary as well. Like, why am I prepping the arguments that I am? Why am I cutting each of the cards that I'm cutting, and in the particular way that I am? So look forward to that. That'll hopefully be in the next like week or so. So yeah, thanks for watching.